When he entered the room, he didn't look that strange. In fact, he had a nice face with a cute smile, and it was obvious that he worked out regularly. But it was impossible to get past the blue spandex suit, the red cape, and of course the big S on his chest. For at least the 10th time, I silently cursed my editor for assigning me to write a story about a psychopath. A couple days ago, she called me into her office. "Have you heard about the guy running around town in a Superman costume?" she asked me. "No," I replied. "Sounds like a psychopath to me." "Quite possibly," she admitted. "But the geniuses in the city department think there might be a story to it, and they want us to figure it out." We tracked him down, and he agreed to an interview. "Guess who'll take it?" she said reproachfully. "Why do I always get weird people?" I asked, raising my eyes to the sky. "But I got the assignment anyway." Oops. All of this flashed through my mind as I got up to face him. I could only hope it wouldn't be that bad. "I'm Ella Finn," I said, rising to shake his hand. "Alex Stevenson," he said, returning my handshake. "Nice to meet you." We sat down, and I pulled out a tape recorder. "I'll be recording today's interview," I said. "Is that okay with you?" "Sure," he agreed easily. "No problem." I checked the microphone one more time to make sure it was on. "So this is Elle Finn, reporter for the New York Times interviewing Alex Stevenson, aka Superman. Mr. Stevenson, let's get right to the point. Do you really believe you are the Man of Steel?" "I'd like you to call me Alex," he replies. "It would make things a lot friendlier." He smiled slightly, and I nodded in agreement. "Anyway, to answer your question, I'll say that no, I'm far from being a superhero." "So why are you wearing a costume?" I asked. His face took on a serious expression. "Probably because I didn't want to be vulnerable anymore." I tried not to react, but it wasn't what I expected. "Sounds like someone hurt you badly," I said cautiously. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He sighed slightly. "Okay," he said and began to tell his story. "The F train had that peculiar smell of dampness that you sometimes get in the summer, and I was glad when I finally reached my stop on Queens Boulevard. But as soon as I descended the stairs into the relentless sunlight at street level, I almost wished I was back underground. When I got to our apartment, I was dying to get inside, under the air conditioning. Glenda usually got home before I did, but when I unlocked the door, the apartment was dark and quiet. After cooling off and changing into shorts and a t-shirt, I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. When I heard the front door open, I called out to her, "Hey baby, I'm in the kitchen. It's so hot, and I thought it would be nice to make a salad for dinner. Do you mind?" She poked her head out from behind the doorframe. "Before you do that, would you mind coming out and talking to me?" "Sure," I said and washed my hands, then walked into the combined living dining room. Glenda was sitting on the couch with her arms folded and her legs tucked up as if she was freezing. Seeing the look on her face, I asked, "Is everything okay, baby?" She raised her head, but didn't look me in the eye as I lowered myself into the chair. "God," she said, "this is harder than I thought." Now I was concerned. "What's the matter, Glenda? What's wrong?" She took a deep breath, then exhaled sharply. "I don't know any other way out, Alex, so I'm going to be blunt. I want a divorce." "What?" I asked dumbly. "Is this a joke or something?" "No," she said quietly. "I'm not joking. I'm going to file for divorce." I felt like I was in one of the bad novels I have to edit at work, except that the characters usually have witty counter-moves. I, on the other hand, had none. "But why? We have a good marriage. I don't want to get divorced. I love you." She shook her head impatiently, as if I were a child being slowly taught lessons. "No, things haven't been this good for a long time. I could feel it, even if you didn't notice it." She shifted on the couch and leaned forward as if trying to sell me something. "You didn't do anything, Alex. We just drifted apart. It's no one's fault. It's just the way it goes sometimes." I tried to protest, but she held up a hand. "Please don't," she said. "There's nothing you can say to make me change my mind. I'll just pack my things and leave," she continued. I was still puzzled. "You're leaving? Where are you going? Can't we talk about this?" She shook her head sadly. "I'm staying at a friend's house until we formalize things here. Please just accept it. We both don't want to say anything that would complicate things." With those words, she disappeared into our bedroom, and while I stood there in shock, She reappeared a surprisingly short time later, rolling her suitcase behind her. It was as if she had already packed it and was waiting. Please, Glenda, how about counseling? Can't we find someone? She stepped around me and opened the door. I'm sorry, Alex, I don't have anything to talk about. This is the way it has to be. With those words, she rolled her bag over the threshold and slammed the door behind her, leaving me standing in stunned silence. I slowly walked over to the couch and collapsed onto it. In the novels I edit, the protagonist goes on a rampage, or goes to the nearest bar to get drunk, or leaves to try to get laid. I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I sat in the impending darkness and tried to find answers to the questions swarming in my head. I just couldn't understand what had happened, much less why. My relationship with Glenda wasn't outstanding. We went to the same college and were part of a group that hung out with each other all 4 years we were there. Most of the time, neither of us were dating each other. It was easier for us to do things as a group rather than as a couple. But in my senior year, Glenda started dating a guy who wasn't a member of our group, and we started seeing her not as often as we used to. I think she was hoping he would propose to her, but he chose grad school in California and they broke up at graduation. I majored in English and, like many others, wanted to go into publishing after graduation. So, like many others, I moved to New York and started looking for a job. 500 resumes and 40 interviews later, I was working as a waiter and living with 5 friends in a one-bedroom apartment in a bad neighborhood in Brooklyn. And then I got lucky. It turned out that my grandfather knew someone in the publishing business, and when he heard about my dreams, he approached me about it. Eventually, I was able to land an internship at a real publishing company. The bad news was that the internship only paid a minimum wage, so I still had to moonlight at night after I was released from my day job. The good news was that now I was actually working in the industry I aspired to and had the opportunity to learn what publishing was like from the inside. I was now working 2 jobs and making one meager salary, including tips. But the wonderful thing about being young is that you have both the energy and the naivete to tolerate those conditions longer than someone not in true bondage. On Tuesday night, when I didn't have restaurant work, my roommates and I decided to head to a bar in Midtown Manhattan and spend some of our precious income on overpriced alcohol. While we were chatting raucously, I looked up and saw none other than Glenda Preston and her 2 girlfriends enter the bar. He abruptly interrupted his narrative. "Can you not mention her name?" he asked. "Why?" I asked curiously. He looked at me a little embarrassed. I guess I'm still trying to make sense of it all. Somehow it seems like open warfare with her isn't going to help. I was surprised. It seemed my psychotype was deeper than I'd realized. "It'll actually be easier for me," I told him. "I won't have to track her down and figure out her side of the story. What's more, this should be about Superman, not his ex-wife." Okay, he said and continued his story. Spotting her, I almost knocked the beer bottle out of my roommate's hands as I rushed over to her. But as I approached her little cove, I stopped, suddenly hesitating. Would she be as glad to see me as I was to see her? But at that moment she looked up and, spotting me, squealed, "Alex!" and rushed to embrace me. We hugged. Then she pulled away, looked at me carefully, and kissed me on the lips. I didn't understand where that came from, but it felt great, so I didn't care. She put her arm around my waist and introduced me to her girlfriends. I, in turn, dragged them to meet my roommates, thus earning countless brownie points since neither of us felt comfortable enough to try to pick up a girl. Glenda and I had a great time that night. It was like being back in college again. Much later than I had planned, we finally broke up for the night, and after exchanging phone numbers, she gave me another kiss full of promise. We started seeing each other every chance we got. The only difference was that this time there was no group to distract us or smooth our interactions, and so the relationship progressed faster and burned hotter than I think either of us expected. One of the realities of living in poverty is how hard it is to find time and space to be alone together. My apartment was a disaster. One or more of my roommates would always show up out of nowhere, usually at the most inopportune moment. Even when I had pre-planned and reserved one of the 2 bedrooms for a few hours, someone would unexpectedly walk in, oblivious to our desire for privacy. Glenda's was a little better because there were only 4 roommates, and they were all girls who understood and followed the rules of social etiquette much more scrupulously. Nevertheless, their apartment was tiny, and the interior walls were thin, so privacy was impossible. especially when we were in the throes of passion. Hearing giggles coming through the door was unpleasant enough, and hearing the constant comments about our connection was just too much. Despite all the obstacles, our relationship continued to grow, and we talked about finding an apartment just for the two of us. But the realities of New York real estate and entry-level salaries made that just another rainbow pipe dream, until fate intervened again. Out of the blue, there was a shakeup at the publishing house and a position opened up for an associate editor. Apparently, I made a good impression because I was offered the job. It paid about as much as I could make in a month as a waiter, but there were employee benefits, so I didn't hesitate to turn in my waiter's uniform and become a real book editor. No sooner had we celebrated my good fortune than Glenda got just as rich. She was moonlighting at Dennison and Loser, one of the many large law firms in town, and when a paralegal position became available, they hired Glenda full-time. She was also a lowly position, but law firms paid more than publishers, and her starting salary was higher than mine. Moreover, when we added up our salaries, we realized we had enough money to make our dream a reality. After much searching, we found a small apartment on the 6th floor of an old building in Forest Hills. The only reason we could afford it was because the building was almost a mile from the nearest subway station. We rented it right away. After that, we went shopping for used furniture, and on moving day, I got down on one knee and presented Glenda with a ring that my parents' loan had allowed me to buy. From the look on Glenda's face, you would have thought it was a hope diamond. The first few years of our marriage were good. Although our funds were extremely limited, we found ways to enjoy the Big Apple and each other. Because we were so far from Brooklyn, I lost touch with my old roommates, but made new friends among the other junior editors at the publishing house. Soon, a small group of us were getting together for lunch or happy hour, and it was a lot like my old college cohort. Glenda kept in touch with her roommates, but she didn't have many friends at the law firm, probably because it was pretty stuffy, at least as far as I could tell. But if her job wasn't a source of social opportunity, it was definitely rewarding from a career standpoint. Glenda showed a real aptitude for legal matters, and her talent was recognized and rewarded. She began to be assigned more challenging assignments, which she enjoyed doing, and upon successful completion, she was promoted and moved up to a higher level of partner in the firm. This inevitably led to longer hours, but she was happy for the opportunity to show what she could do, and I was happy for her. And that brought me back to tonight and Glenda's sudden, incomprehensible departure. I went to the refrigerator, pulled out a six-pack of beer, and went back to the couch to try to figure out what had happened. I hadn't expected this turn of events. Sure, we no longer had that feeling of first love where I can't tear myself away from you for a minute. But no one stays that way forever. Sure, work had kept us apart more and more lately, but isn't that the price you have to pay for success? It drove me crazy that we had no major fights, no clash of goals or values, nothing that could explain her decision. Okay, I'll admit that there were times when she was intolerant of our standard of living, but I felt the same way. And anyway, weren't we on a path that would eventually lead us to more of the things we wanted? Glenda was already moving in that direction, and when one of the seniors, that's what we called the senior editors at my company, finally decided to retire, I'd be in line for a nice promotion too. So what was the problem? The more I recounted events and the longer I drank, the more chaotic my emotions became. I became despondent at the thought that my marriage might fall apart. I loved Glenda, and it hurt like hell to find out she no longer loved me. What was I supposed to tell my parents? They loved Glenda too, and were looking forward to having grandchildren. The thought infuriated me. How could she be so impulsive and selfish? Did she not realize how many people she was hurting, starting with me? This, of course, made me depressed again about her inexplicable departure. Staggering back into the bedroom, I collapsed onto our double bed, not bothering to undress. Screw it, I thought drunkenly. It doesn't matter anyway. The problem with beer is that it creates an undeniable need for relief, so strong that it woke me up early in the morning and made me go to the bathroom. I barely made it, and emptying my bladder was so painful that I almost screamed. When I finally finished, I found that I was already awake. My stomach felt like I had drunk battery acid. And at the same time, I felt like I hadn't eaten in a day, which I realized was almost true. Swearing, I surrendered to the inevitable, got up, showered, and shaved. Then I headed towards the subway station and walked into a small coffee shop to get some breakfast. There was only one other customer there at that hour. Similarly, when I arrived at the office, I was the first person there. I tried to immerse myself in my work, but my thoughts kept returning to what had happened. Not knowing the reason for her leaving kept me in suspense. And as time went on, I became angrier and angrier. Eventually, I convinced myself that I deserved an answer and decided to act. Glenda and I never met during work hours. Our business was sacred, not to be disturbed. Today was an exception. I knew when Glenda usually left for lunch and carefully timed my visit so that I would arrive just before she left. I even splurged on a cab to her office so that I wouldn't be late. When I entered Dennison and Lauser's office, I didn't recognize the receptionist, but since I met very few people there, it didn't surprise me. "Hello," I said. "I'm Alex Stevenson, Glenda Preston's husband. I've come to ask her to lunch." The receptionist looked up at me with astonished eyes. "Okay, I'll just call her and let her know you're here." "No, no," I said hastily. "It's a surprise. I'll just go back for her." She looked at me questioningly, but I strode confidently past the counter to the front door, and she obediently let me through. As I walked down the aisles, I noticed a few curious looks, but I ignored them and headed straight for Glenda's counter. She was chatting with another young woman, but when she saw me, she stopped abruptly and her face went pale. "What are you doing, Alex?" she demanded. "You can't be here. I'm working." "Well, I am here," I said belligerently, "and I intend to stay here until you tell me why you left me last night." "Keep your voice down," she hissed, her face turning bright red. "I explained to you last night why I was leaving." I was getting angrier and angrier. "You didn't explain anything. You just told me a bunch of platitudes that mean nothing." Now, she looked around and I realized we had attracted a small crowd. Other people working in the area huddled around her in a semicircle, as if to help her fend off an attack. I was embarrassed, but I couldn't back down. Realizing that a confrontation couldn't be avoided, Glenda seemed to jump at the opportunity. "You want to know why I left you?" she said, making no attempt to lower her voice. "Well, I'll tell you. I'm leaving you because you're a nobody. You're a weak little man hanging on to your pathetic job, hoping that someday someone will die and you'll get promoted. You're boring and uninteresting. You've gotten fat and sloppy. That's why I'm leaving you." I stood there in shock with my mouth open. I felt like I had been punched in the face. Who was this woman? "But," I objected weakly, "you didn't say anything before." "Well, I just did, loser," she snapped back. "And you want to know something else? You sucks in bed, and not in a good way." "Ooh, great," I heard someone exclaim in the crowd. I was stunned and my pride was hurt. "Well, screw you," I said firmly. She only laughed. "Screw you? You work for a publishing company and screw you is the best you can do? That's just pathetic." "Ouch! That's gotta hurt," came another voice from behind me, and the whole group burst into laughter. Humiliated, I looked at her, then turned and walked out, continuing to laugh. When I walked through the door into the reception area, the receptionist looked up in surprise. "Aren't you going to lunch with Glenda?" Eh, she asked. "No," I replied curtly. "Oh," she said and smiled broadly. "Well, have a good day." Luckily, the elevator door opened at that moment, and I hurried inside in time to escape. There was no hope of getting any work done in time, so I called the office and told them some of the things I'd eaten I didn't like. Then, I got on the subway at Queen Station and headed home. After changing into jeans and a t-shirt, I went downstairs and went for a walk to Flushing Meadows and the Old World's Fair site. I found a place to sit down near the Unisphere, and as I looked at the huge metal sculpture of the globe, I thought about what had just happened to me. I'd never heard Glenda complain about any of the things she'd accused me of in her office today. Sure, I was ambitious, but I was also smart enough to realize that opportunities don't come along very often in the publishing business. What's wrong with being patient? And that rant about my sexual activity, it was a low blow, literally. She never once complained. But if she wasn't satisfied, I was happy to do more or try something different if she'd only mention it. Still, I had to admit that her insult shook me to the core. I lowered my gaze to myself and noticed an incipient roll of fat around my waist. Damn, I had allowed myself to get sloppy. When I was in college, I kept myself in pretty good shape, but the fat around my middle was something I couldn't deny. Beer and bar food, I thought guiltily. I immediately made a vow to myself, join a gym, give up alcohol. After Glenda's scathing assessment today, I was under no illusions that I could win her back, nor did I want to, but I could damn well show her that I could change if she'd only give me a chance. I pulled out my smartphone and found a gym near my office. It wasn't cheap, but I figured the fact that I could save money on beer would help me survive. I went back to work the next morning, bringing my gym bag with me, and for the next 2 weeks I went to work out every day after work. My muscles ached, but not as much as my ego and, admittedly, my heart. Even if Glenda had turned into some kind of harpy, I couldn't overnight fall out of love with the woman who had recently been my wife. The other junior editors called me to join them on their walks after work, but I dodged them, making one excuse or another to get out of it. I didn't want to tell them I'd given up alcohol. I didn't want them to know I went to the gym every day now. And most of all, I didn't want to admit the reason why. No, but of course I was a fool if I thought I could maintain that facade for long. Anyway, one afternoon I got a call from Candy at the front desk letting me know I had a visitor. As I walked outside, I saw a man I was sure I had never met before. Nevertheless, he smiled pleasantly at me and asked, "Alex Stevenson?" "Yes," I replied curiously. He handed me an envelope. "Mr. Stevenson, you have been served." With those words, he bowed to Candy, turned, and left. Candy had already outlived several husbands, so she knew exactly what had happened. Even if she didn't know, the look on my face would have been obvious to her. "Oh, Alex, I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know you and Glenda were having problems." I nodded at her words and turned to walk back to my desk, not trusting my voice to say anything. Sure, I had expected something like this, but the finality of the divorce decree still made a strong impression on me. The envelope lay unopened on my desk as the clock struck 5 o'clock, and my 3 best friends from work stood in front of me. "Let's go, Alex," Marie said, grabbing my hand. "You're coming with us." Sarah, I tried to protest, but the 3 of them wouldn't settle down and I didn't have the strength to resist. When we got to the bar, they all looked at each other when I ordered a soda with lemon, but no one said anything. Finally, Jacob took the bull by the horns. "Okay, Alex, Candy told us about what happened today. Come on, spill it. What happened between you and Glenda?" So I told. I wasn't going to wash my dirty laundry in front of my friends, but it had been festering inside me for so long that once I started, everything came out, even the details of my humiliating encounter with Glenda in her office. "That bitch," Tommy exclaimed, "must have slept with Connor, ouch." He turned to Marie with an accusing look. "What did you kick me for?" But I paid no attention to their bickering and seized on Tommy's words. "Slept with Connor? Are you talking about Connor James from her law firm? What does he have to do with Glenda?" I demanded. "Well, after we saw him sucking her face, it was pretty obvious, ouch." "Damn it, Marie, that really hurts." "Don't you know when to keep your mouth shut?" Marie hissed at Tommy as he stood rubbing his shin. Then she turned to me with an apologetic look on her face. "I'm really sorry, Alex. Back in March, the 3 of us went out to dinner and then we walked into a bar and saw them together. From the way they were acting, it was pretty obvious what was going on." I made a few quick mental calculations. No, it couldn't have been her. She took night classes back in March. "Oh, yes," Jacob picked up on that. She took night classes. Then he saw Marie's angry look and took a quick step back to avoid getting under her foot. "Don't either of you ever think before you speak?" She asked with annoyance. She turned to face me again. "Alex, that wasn't the only time. The 2 of them weren't exactly forthright." Now I was not only angry, but humiliated. "You knew? And you didn't tell me? What kind of friends are you?" Marie took my hand. "Come on, Alex, it's not that simple. We didn't know what was really going on, and neither of us wanted to spread rumors. Besides, they were so blatant about it that we thought maybe you knew and—" "You thought I knew and didn't mind?" I asked in amazement. "I can't believe it." I headed for the door, but Jacob grabbed my arm. "Look, kid, the truth is, if any of us told you about this, you'd deny everything and start hating us. You know it's true. Everyone shoots the messenger." Deep down, I knew he was right, but it didn't make me feel any better. To be so humiliated in front of Glenda's coworkers, to be cuckolded in front of my friends was beyond me. It was the coup de grace, the ultimate wound. Alex looked up at me, confused but defiant. Anyway, that's when I decided to start wearing the Superman suit. I was so engrossed in his story that I had to snap out of my reverie. I'd been dumped before and it had hurt. but Alex's experience must have been much more painful and humiliating. I went into reporter mode again. But I still don't get it, Alex. How did you go from abandoned husband to Superman costume? He continued his story. I wasn't sure I could handle going back to work, but I forced myself to go to the gym the next morning because exercise seemed like the only way to take my mind off everything else. It didn't work that morning. All I could think about was wanting to hide, become invisible, or turn into someone else. Eventually, I gave up and left. On my way to the office, I passed a bookstore. There were books and posters about superheroes hanging in the window. As a kid, I loved comic books and cartoons and had seen almost every movie about comic book heroes. Like all kids, I dreamed of being a superhero. Now, in my desperate state of mind, these memories came over me with renewed vigor. Then I remembered the previous Halloween, when I showed up to a costume party dressed as Batman. It was just a cheap mask and costume, but I felt good in it and enjoyed the party immensely. But now the superhero I envied was Superman, because he couldn't be harmed. After all the pain and humiliation I had endured, the idea of being invulnerable seemed extremely desirable. And I guess a lot of things came together in me at the same time. My life was miserable and I wanted to be someone else. I felt weak and helpless and I wanted to be strong. I also felt vulnerable and didn't want to be hurt. I know I probably sound crazy, and to be honest, I really knew that wearing a Superman costume, bullets wouldn't bounce off of me. I just wanted to feel like that for a little while, even if it wasn't real. I just felt so awful that I felt like I had to try something, even the craziest thing, to make myself feel better. Anyway, at that moment it felt like the right thing to do, and so I did. When he fell silent, I decided I needed to change the subject. Okay, so how did you get your suit? He brightened. There's a little tailor shop between my apartment and the subway station. It's run by a wonderful old seamstress named Golda Mermelstein. On my way home, I stopped by and told her what I needed. She listened silently while I described what I needed, then took out a tape measure and started taking measurements, as if what I was asking for was a regular thing. Come back in a week, she said in a thick Yiddish accent. That's how I got my suit, he concluded. She did an amazing job. He stood up, turned around so I could admire Mrs. Mermelstein's work, and I realized that my first impression had been correct. Alex was indeed very trim. The stretchy material fit him tightly, and I admired the work for a moment. He coughed politely, and I realized I'd been staring at him for too long. I quickly grabbed my notebook and went through the notes I had prepared. Why don't you tell me about the first time you put on the suit? I asked. He sat back down. The following Saturday, I decided to wear it for the first time. It was the scariest night of my life. He grinned in surprise. You know, it wasn't easy the first time. I started to like women who wore pantyhose, but anyway, when I put them on, it felt pretty nice, kind of like sportswear. Besides, I told myself, it would take forever to get out of them again, so I might as well go for it. As I walked to the subway, I noticed a few people looking at me, but no one said anything. I guess in New York, it's common to see strange people walking down the street. But I noticed that when I went down to the subway platform to wait, all the people around me stepped back. The same thing happened when I entered the subway car. No one sat next to me or looked at me. But after a while, I noticed a little girl about 6 years old who was riding with her mom. She looked at me and suddenly ran up and asked, "Are you Superman?" I could see her mom was starting to panic, and I didn't want to scare her, so I kept my hands at my side and smiled at the little girl. "No," I told her. "I just like to dress up as Superman sometimes." Then, before her mother could pull her away from me, I asked, "Do you like to play dress-up?" The girl looked at me triumphantly. "Oh yes, but I like to dress up like a princess." With those words, she raised her arms above her head and twirled like a ballerina. I smiled again and started asking her about being a princess. Her mother watched me carefully, but I noticed that the tension on her face had subsided a bit. I also noticed some of the other passengers watching us and even caught a couple smiles from them. The girl and I chatted until I reached my stop. I slowly stood up, trying not to make any sudden movements. I should get going. I waved my hand lightly at her. "Bye, princess." She waved back at me. "Bye-bye, Superman." As I walked down to the platform, the little girl's mom smiled slightly at me, and I nodded my thanks. I was feeling pretty good about myself. But there was an even bigger challenge ahead of me. I decided to see what it was like to be in a crowd of people, so I planned to go to a popular night spot and hang out there. When I got to the door, I saw that it was full of people and I hesitated. Then I thought, Superman wouldn't be afraid to go in there. He would walk in there as if the place belonged to him. So I pushed the door open and went inside. As I walked toward the bar, I could hear the noise die down as I passed groups of people. As soon as I passed them, some kind of buzz filled the silence, and I realized that people were wondering what they would think of me. But the bartender was calm when he noticed me, and calmly asked for my order as if it happened every night. My request for a soda and lime didn't evoke even a shadow of surprise. As I stood there sipping my drink, the guy standing next to me rubbed my shoulder. "So are you in a movie or something?" He asked. "No," I answered him. "I just wanted to do this to try something different." "Okay, cool," he said, and started to turn away. I was relieved. I'm usually pretty introverted, but since I'd gotten this far, I might as well push it further. "So you're a fan of Superman movies?" I asked, and soon we were chatting about comic book character movies. Other people around us began to join in, and we had a great time discussing the relative merits of various action heroes. Finally, the woman next to me pulled out her cell phone to take a picture of me, and when I saw the time, I was surprised. I was having such a good time that I didn't notice it was getting late. I paid the bartender, leaving him a good tip, and headed for the exit. As I was getting to the door, someone in the crowd called out, "Good night, Superman," and several people joined in. I turned, waved, and swung my cape to the laughter and cheers of the crowd. Nothing else happened on the subway to Queens, but when I entered my apartment, I felt so good that I stayed up late to take off my Superman costume because the whole experience was so positive. Later, when I got into bed, I realized that for the first time I had spent an entire evening without thinking about Glenda. After that, I started wearing the suit almost every weekend, and in the evenings too. Most people liked it when they saw me in it, and I found that I no longer felt so vulnerable. Plus, it was a great excuse to talk. Alex smiled at me, and I couldn't help but smile back. I guess I was happy for him, but I suspected that while his life in the superhero suit had started out well, it might have a dark side. It left me guessing. "Okay," I said. "I think that's logic." Look, that's enough interviews for today. I'll want to ask you some more questions later, but we need to go to the park to take some pictures. My editor arranged for one of our staff photographers to take some shots of Alex in costume in Central Park. For one thing, there were some nice backdrops there that would make for some great shots. Also, Alex told us that he goes there often, and we were hoping we could get some shots of him interacting with people. The two of us got into a cab, and the cabbie couldn't take his eyes off of Alex's suit. To my surprise, Alex started striking up a conversation with him, and soon the two of them were discussing the merits of capes. "My father wore a cape in the old country," the driver said, and Alex remarked that they were surprisingly comfortable. I tried not to roll my eyes, but I have to admit I found it a little amusing when Alex shook the cab driver's hand and wished him well. The older man responded just as warmly, and I realized that I had just witnessed Alex making a new friend. Very interesting. I was going to suggest that Alex pose on one of the park's arched bridges, but the photographer wanted him to stand on a granite ledge that really looked dramatic. From the right angle, you could even make out the twin Dakota ledges towering above the tree line in the distance. Alex was clearly enjoying himself, moving and posing as directed by the photographer, but not looking unnatural or awkward. He really feels at home in that suit, I thought, and slightly envied his equanimity. Suddenly, a childish voice called out, "Hey, Superman!" And I could see that Alex was genuinely excited. In an instant, he jumped off the boulder and went over to greet a group of half a dozen or so teenage boys, calling some of them by name. Soon they were sitting on the grass in a ring around Alex, listening to him tell a story about Superman that I was sure he'd made up himself. Finally, a mother's voice came from across the field, and all the boys jumped up and ran off, laughing and waving at Alex. "Sorry about that," he said, coming back to us. "I've met these kids here before, so I couldn't just brush them off. Besides, I really like kids. I'd like to have a couple myself." Then his face lost its smile for a moment, and I realized he was thinking about his failed marriage. I couldn't help it, my heart clenched. But he soon brushed that mood away and his smile returned. I turned to address the photographer. "Did you get everything you needed?" I asked. "Oh yes," she replied enthusiastically. "The poses on the rocks were great, and I got lots of good shots while he was telling the kids stories. Then she looked at me strangely and whispered, "Is this guy real?" I shook my head. I wish I knew. I walked over to him again. "You were great with the kids, and it seemed to go well at the bar the night you told me about. But don't people ever laugh at you or make fun of you?" I asked. "Oh, sure," he answered carelessly. "Often. But I just wave and smile at them and they don't bother me." He looked at me shrewdly. I have a way of dealing with things like that. When something unpleasant happens, I ask myself, what would Superman do? For example, if someone started making fun of Superman, it wouldn't bother him one bit. He knows who he is and what he's capable of, and their remarks bounce off him like bullets. I hesitated. What if people don't want to talk to the man in the suit? Don't you think you sometimes push people away? "I guess so," he said thoughtfully. "But if they don't want to deal with me, that's fine. I don't try to impose myself on others. I just try to live like everyone else. I just do it differently." He saw that I was skeptical and suddenly perked up. "Hey, I have an idea. Are you doing anything tomorrow night?" When I admitted that I didn't have any plans, he got excited. "Instead of another job interview, why don't you come with me? We'll go somewhere and you can see for yourself what it's like." When I hesitated, he leaned across the table to me impatiently. "Come on, it'll be fun. What have you got to lose?" This was starting to turn into more than I expected, but I knew what my editor wanted me to do, and besides, his enthusiasm was infectious. "Okay, I'll do it," I told him. And he looked genuinely pleased. That evening, back at my apartment, I told Terry, my roommate, about my strange interview. She, too, thought he looked like another nutcase. When I told her I accepted his invitation to go out with him the next night, she only rolled her eyes. "Come on, Elle," she said. "Can't you find a normal guy to date?" I laughed, but her words hurt me a little. I'd had a few bad encounters, and Terry knew I was intimidating. Sure, Terry considered herself more my guardian angel than my roommate, but I appreciated her concern for me. Not surprisingly, I was a little nervous the next night when the cab dropped me off at the bar where I was supposed to meet Alex. I had no idea what to expect, and the fact that Alex was nowhere to be seen didn't improve my mood. But suddenly I heard my name being called, and when I turned around, I saw Alex in his Superman costume rushing down the sidewalk toward me. "This is going to be fun," he said with a confident smile, and taking my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, he led me inside. As soon as we passed through the door, I heard the tone of the background noise change. People were pointing and talking to each other, and I started to feel very uncomfortable. But Alex immediately ducked into the crowd and led me behind him to the bar. The bartender spotted Alex and shouted loudly, "Superman's in the house!" Immediately, the room filled with cheers and applause, and the excitement level seemed to rise. After consulting with me, Alex ordered me a glass of white wine, and I saw with interest that he had gotten a soda for himself. As soon as the drinks arrived, he took my hand and dragged me towards a large cluster of people on one side of the hall. As we walked, people kept reaching out to shake his hand or greet him. I was getting more than my share of curious stares, and I began to realize that being with Alex meant being around a little celebrity. Alex flowed into the conversation like a kid jumping into a pool on a hot day. He would instantly engage in a discussion with almost anyone within earshot, and I marveled at the ease with which he participated. As I observed what was going on, I noticed a few things. First, although he was actively participating in the conversation, he was careful not to dominate it. Instead, he constantly asked for other people's opinions, and when he seemed to disagree with them, he simply turned to someone else and asked for their opinion. Secondly, he was consistently friendly, smiling at people and giving them positive feedback, making them feel good about themselves. Lastly, even though I was only there as a passive observer, he made an effort to involve me in the process, and I couldn't help but appreciate his sensitivity. He was easy to communicate with. Another thing I soon learned was that Alex never stood still for long periods of time. He was constantly circulating through the crowd, talking to new people as they came into his sphere of communication, and then moving on quite naturally. I was surprised to find myself enjoying the evening. I expected to be a fly on the wall, observing and making mental notes for my article. Instead, I found myself talking to people much more than usual and enjoying it. I also found myself drinking a few more glasses of white wine, which probably contributed to even more conversation. At some point towards the end of the evening, a rather attractive blonde woman squeezed through the crowd, She approached Alex and, pointing at me, asked demandingly, "Is this your date?" Alex turned to me with a smile on his face and asked, "I don't know, Elle. Are you my date?" I blushed and quickly replied, "No, I'm just a friend." "Good," the blonde said, and then began to brazenly caress the front of Alex's swim trunks. "So why don't you and I go back to my place and find out if you really are a man of steel?" She asked insistently. Alex blushed even harder than I did and quickly pulled her hand away. "Sorry, but I'm all business today." Her face reflected disappointment, but she wasn't ready to give up. "You know, we could do that too." When Alex shook his head with a smile, she said, "That's your defeat, superhero," and walked off in her stilettos with a disgruntled expression on her face. Alex leaned over to say quietly in my ear, "Looks like the locals are getting restless," he said with a wry smirk. "Maybe we should call it a night." I froze at this little interlude and was surprised to realize that approaching an aggressive woman made me jealous, so I was glad when Alex took my hand and started leading me toward the door. And then, what I was so afraid of happened. A huge man, clearly drunk, stepped out of the crowd directly into our path. He stared at Alex and smirked as if Alex had insulted him. "So you're the wimp who thinks he's a superhero?" He growled, and the crowd around us fell silent. Clinging to Alex, I watched as two other rough-looking men closed ranks behind the giant and fumbled for my cell phone so I'd be ready to call emergency services if chaos broke out. To his credit, Alex didn't flinch. "I'm the one wearing the Superman suit," he said in an even tone, "but I'm far from a superhero." The big guy squinted. "If you're not a superhero, why the screw are you wearing a Superman costume?" he belligerently demanded. "Do you really want to know?" Alex asked with a solemn expression on his face, and I couldn't help but wonder what was on his mind. Was he deliberately trying to provoke the big man? I was horrified. "I wouldn't ask you if I didn't want to know, smartass," growled the big man. Alex leaned toward him and said quietly, "My wife cheated on me with another man. She ran away, broke my heart, and humiliated me. I put on the suit to protect myself because I don't want to be hurt like that again." The big guy looked at Alex for a long time and then did something I never would have thought he would do. He wrapped his arms around Alex and hugged him. "Damn, boy, I know how you feel. My wife did the same thing to me." Then he let go of Alex, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "Take care of yourself, you hear?" With those words, he stepped aside, opening a path for us to the door. Behind us, someone shouted, "Good night, Superman." And as others picked up on that cry, we left the building. On the sidewalk, I started to shake. "Oh my God, Alex, I thought he was going to kill you," I said in a shaky voice. I said in a shaky voice. I said in a shaky voice. Alex looked at me triumphantly. "I thought so too," he said. Then his smile returned and he said, "Let's go eat." I let him lead me to the late-night diner, and after we'd ordered, I started babbling. "What made you say that to that guy?" I wanted to know. "How did you know he would react like that?" Alex shook his head. "I had no idea what he was going to do. I just figured Superman wouldn't try to get out of the situation but tell the truth and see what happens." "Yeah," I said, "but Superman couldn't get hurt. That guy could have blown your head off." Alex smiled sadly. "You're probably right, but I was already hurt, so I thought, who cares what happens again?" I took a bite out of my sandwich to give myself time to think. I was beginning to realize how seriously injured this man was and how much he was relying on the nominal protection of his suit. I decided to change the subject. "I was impressed with how easily you were able to get all these people talking. You should run for political office." "No," he immediately replied. "I'm not interested. I'm just learning to enjoy talking to people." I shook my head. "How many of those people at the bar do you know?" I asked curiously. He smiled. "None of them. The only one I recognized was the bartender." I found that hard to believe. "How did you learn to make conversation with strangers so easily?" He shook his head. "It's funny, El. All my life I've been shy around people. Back in high school, I stuck to crowds because I didn't feel confident alone. In a group, I could just react to what everyone else was saying." The trace of a smile at the corners of his mouth disappeared from his face. After Glenda left, things got a lot worse. I didn't want to see anyone or be with anyone. I just wanted to dig a hole and crawl into it. But after I started wearing the Superman costume, I found it much easier to go out and meet new people and talk to them. I just thought about how Superman handles situations and tried to act the same way. The image of a shy and indecisive Alex didn't fit in any way with the extrovert I'd observed just a few minutes ago, so I brought it up. Maybe the suit helped you come out of your shell, I said, but that doesn't explain how you learned to talk to people like that. It's not a big deal, he said. I really like people, I just never felt comfortable around them. Now I do, and I want to know what they think and how they feel. I feel good, and I want them to feel good too. I didn't say anything back, but all I could think was, there's a lot more to this guy than I thought. At that moment, a woman walked into the diner, and it made me think of my encounter with the predatory blonde again. I asked Alex about the incident. Do things like that happen often? I inquired. He was visibly embarrassed. Yes, he admitted. It's happened a few times. Did you go home with any of them? I asked. He didn't look at me. A couple times, maybe. And how did it go? I asked before I could close my mouth. What was I thinking, asking a question like that? But before I could backtrack, he was already answering. It was the first time I hadn't been with a woman since Glenda left, and I guess I really wanted it. He laughed in relief. After that, she accused me of being faster than a bullet. But then things got better, he continued ingenuously. I just kept reminding myself that Superman could control himself, and girls started liking me more. But pretty soon I got to the point where getting laid didn't seem so appealing anymore. He looked at me with pain in his eyes. I guess I'm old-fashioned. All I wanted was one woman, if she was the right one. I thought Glenda was the same, but it turned out different. He glanced suddenly at the clock above the counter. Do you have to go home? He asked thoughtfully, and looking at the time, I was shocked at how late it was already. He walked me to the sidewalk and caught a cab for me. I guess a cape fluttering in the wind comes in handy sometimes. While the cabbie was looking at it, Alex opened the door and helped me inside. Thanks, Elle, he said. I know it was just for your article, but I really enjoyed being with you tonight. He closed the door then, and as the cab pulled away, I looked back and saw him standing on the curb. The cabbie turned to look at me. Who was that? He asked curiously. I'm still not sure I know, I replied. When I got home, Terry was waiting for me, wanting to know all about my evening. After I finished telling her about the night's adventures, she asked me what I thought of Alex. When I told her about how badly he'd been hurt, she gave me a stern look. He may have had a hard time because of his ex-wife, but he's not a lost kitten, Elle. You don't need to give him shelter and a bowl of milk, you know that. I know, I said, but it was hard for me to stop thinking about him and everything he'd been through. When I sat down to write the article about Alex, I had a really hard time getting started. On the one hand, retelling the experiences Alex shared with me would be easy, and what I observed in the park and at the bar would definitely make a great piece. But I found that I struggled to convey what was really going on inside Alex. One question every reader would like an answer to is why a seemingly normal guy would do such a seemingly irrational act. I reread the article several times before I came up with a headline I liked. It seemed to me that superhero heartbreak best captured the essence of the argument, and once I realized that, the rest went easily. When I got the assignment, I was sure it would be a waste of time and my work would be ruined. But after a tumultuous day and night spent with Alex, and another day spent trying to describe what was really going on inside him, I became very careful about my work. I didn't want it to end up in Spike, and I was horrified when I finally turned it in to my editor. An hour later, she called me. Do you have more? She asked gruffly. What do you mean? I asked irritably. It's the right length as it is. I carefully edited the article down to the standard length for the city section. I consider myself a serious writer and realized that if I didn't edit my work, someone else would start editing it and ruin what I had done. It's not suitable for Sunday Magazine, she said, and I sighed. An article in Sunday Magazine could be much longer. What's more, the articles that appear there get a lot of attention, and unlike the daily articles, they stay on the Times website all week. I was shocked, pleasantly shocked of course, but still. I went back to the computer and started pulling up all the clippings. With all those lovely extra column inches at my disposal, I quickly began to rework what I had, turning it from a news story into a feature article. I kept the basic idea, but now, freed from the inverted pyramid style, allowed the story to flow much more organically. By the end of the day, I had finished the article and my editor was quite pleased. "It's really good, Elle," she told me, "and you managed to send it to the Sunday edition." I felt I had hit the mark. In the evening, I did something I shouldn't have done. I called Alex and told him to check the Sunday Times magazine that weekend. "So it won't be on the daily news?" he asked uncertainly. "Is that good or bad?" "Oh, it's definitely a good thing," I said. "You'll see." After I hung up the phone, however, I began to be overcome with doubt. What I'd turned into the editor was a positive, honest human interest story, and I thought it captured Alex very well. But that didn't mean the finished product would turn out that way. What if some higher-up editor decided to turn the story into a humorous article mocking Alex, or worse, mocking him? It had happened before, and the result could be pretty brutal. If it had happened, he would have thought I had written it that way. The more I thought about it, the more I regretted not calling him. Reporters are supposed to keep their distance from their subjects, to be impartial. If they don't, they lose objectivity, and then it's no longer reporting. But damn it, I found that I couldn't help but like Alex, and if my article turned into a rant, I'd feel terrible. Besides, I admitted to myself, it's likely I'll never see this guy again. While that was still unlikely, it would be nice to think it was possible. I purposely avoided flipping through the magazine, but when my own copy of the Times appeared on my doorstep, I quickly reached for the magazine section. The cover featured a picture of Alex standing on a boulder in Central Park with smiling eyes and a hard expression on his face. Beneath it was the headline, "Queen Superhero with a Broken Heart." Oh my gosh, my story made the cover. I quickly switched to the article, under my author's title, and started reading. No, I was relieved to see that they hadn't turned my article into a parody. Moreover, the more I read, the more I realized that they had used it almost exactly as I had written it. Not only that, they had used it in its entirety. My whole damn article. Wow. I sat there in my pajamas and felt great. Getting a cover story was an amazing coup that a reporter like me could only dream of. And then another thought hit me. I want Alex to read the article and tell me he liked it. Where did that come from? I wondered. After reading the article, Terry just shook her head. "You're at it again, Elle. That guy is really mean. I don't want you to get hurt." I ignored her. On Monday, I received numerous congratulatory phone calls, but I hadn't heard from Alex. I realized he didn't have much reason to call, but I grew more wary each day. Maybe he had a different reaction to the article, I thought. Or maybe he was offended by my attempts to form a balanced opinion of him. Or maybe, I thought sadly, he just wasn't interested in talking to me. I was deep in self-pity when my cell phone rang. It was Alex. "Hey, Elle," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't call you sooner, but things have been crazy around here. None of my friends at work can believe it's me. Even my mom called from Illinois. I don't know how she found out. She's worried about me," he said with a laugh. "She thinks I'm crazy." He kept talking nonsense, and I tried to get a word in edgewise. Finally, he paused to catch his breath, and I took advantage of the moment. "So," I said, "what did you think of the article?" "Oh, it was," he said, then paused, and I heard him talking to someone else for a few seconds before he got back on the line. "Look, that was my boss, so I gotta go. But before I do, I was wondering if you could have lunch with me on Wednesday. Then we can talk more about it." "Sure, I guess," I said, trying not to give away my impatience. "Great." He cheered and gave me the name of a small establishment on 8th Avenue, not far from my office. "I'll see you Wednesday at noon," he said, and left. As I hung up the phone, I regretted that we hadn't had time to talk about the article, but it didn't sound like he was unhappy with it. Anyway, I thought, at least he wants to see me again. Turning back to the computer screen, I saw a slight smile in his reflection. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes earlier than usual on Wednesday, but when I looked inside, Alex was already there, and he was wearing a Superman costume. There was no way I was expecting that. He was chatting animatedly with some man when I walked in, but when he noticed me, he shook his hand like they were old friends and then rushed over to me. Leaning over, he kissed me on the cheek and then led me back to the table. "Who was that man?" I asked curiously. "Oh, it was the owner of the restaurant. When he saw me come in wearing a suit, he came over and wanted to talk to me," Alex explained nonchalantly. as if this sort of thing happened to him every day. Then his face took on an expression of great animation. "You won't believe what's happening to me," he said with the enthusiasm of a little boy. "I was telling you about my friends at work and how surprised they were to read about me. Anyway, they emphatically demanded that I wear a suit to work on Tuesday. I didn't even think about it because I really want to be taken seriously at my job, and I was afraid of what the reaction would be. But they kept insisting, and finally I decided the hell with it." He paused while the waitress brought us our food, then quickly continued his story in between bites. "Anyway, when I came in Tuesday morning, my friends started raging, and then my supervisor walked in. I was horrified, but she just stared at me for a minute. Then she snorted and said, 'Okay, I think you can wear that thing, but if it detracts from the work environment, you'll have to change.' I was shocked. I thought she was going to be furious about it, but the fact that she didn't freak out made me feel even more confident. After lunch, I decided to take another risk. I did something I'd wanted to do for a long time but hadn't dared to do before I put the suit on." He leaned across the table to me, and his enthusiasm was palpable. Every week, publishers receive dozens of unclaimed manuscripts from aspiring writers. They just get thrown in the trash, and most are ignored or sent an automated "thanks but no thanks" letter, he explained. But I started looking through some of them to see what they were about and found one that seemed really good. Beginning authors are usually terrible. They use bad grammar and come up with trite or ridiculous plots. But this book was much better, and I really thought it had everything I needed to be a good salesman. I was afraid to take it to Mrs. Grissom, my boss, because junior editors don't do that. He grinned broadly. Anyway, on Tuesday I decided to act more like Superman than myself. After lunch, I went to her office and handed her the manuscript. After she told me to stop wasting her time, I said, "Mrs. Grissom, just take it home and read the first couple of chapters. If I've really wasted your time, then you should fire me because I clearly don't have the talent for this job." I tried not to show my reaction, but everything inside me clenched. What Alex was describing was something I'd often dreamed of because I'd always wanted to be a serious writer. I'd even written a novel, but I'd never tried to submit it anywhere because I knew it wasn't good enough. To hide my envy, I said, "You didn't really do it, did you, Alex? I know how much you love your job. You take a lot of risks." He grinned crookedly. "Maybe I do, but I really believe in it, and I figured it was better to take risks than to be constantly afraid of failure." "So what happened?" I inquired. "Nothing yet," he said. "Mrs. Grissom is out of town and won't be back until Friday." "My goodness," I said. "I'll be nervous waiting to see what she thinks. That's why I wanted to have lunch with you today, so I could have something nicer on my mind." I blushed in spite of myself. I knew it was just flattery, but it still felt good. And then he said something that made me feel even better. "There's another reason I wanted to see you today. This Saturday, one of the big online bookstores is throwing a swanky cocktail party for the publishing industry. We should all go, and I'd really like you to come with me." "You want me to be your date?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, if you're not in a relationship and you want to go." No, I'm not in a relationship. I mean, yes, I would love to go with you," I replied, stammering. "Great," he said, and handed me a copy of the invitation. "Here are all the details. Why don't I meet you in the lobby at 8 o'clock? And I nodded because I seemed to be having trouble speaking. To hide my awkwardness, I glanced at my watch. "Oh, wow, I have to get back to work." Alex nodded and started to crane his neck looking for the waitress who was supposed to bring our check. But instead, the owner spotted him and approached our table. "It's not often we get to have a superhero lunch," he smiled. "Your lunch is on the house." Alex stood up and thanked him warmly, then they hugged, as is customary for men, and we headed for the door. "That was amazing," I said to Alex. "I've never seen a restaurant charge that kind of money for lunch before." "You should go out with superheroes more often," he winked. Alex walked me to the office, waving and nodding to strangers who spoke to him along the way. When we reached the front of the building, he said, "Thanks for the great article and thanks for having lunch with me." Then, before I could respond, he leaned over and kissed me on the lips. When I froze with surprise, he turned to leave. "Don't forget about Saturday night," he said with a smile, and disappeared. What just happened? I asked myself, slowly walking back to my desk. All day I had been having a hard time focusing on work. On Saturday, I couldn't believe how nervous I was getting ready for the cocktail party. You're acting like you're getting ready for prom, I scolded myself. But then I remembered that I didn't actually go to prom because I didn't have a date. Anyway, I pulled out my best little black dress and black ankle straps with heels that were higher than I remembered. After examining myself in the mirror, I regretted for the thousandth time that I hadn't gone a little bigger on top, but my legs looked good, and I decided that would do just fine. Terry came in to give me a final checkup. She silently walked around me and then stopped in front of me, nodding approvingly. "Have a good time, sweetheart, but take care of yourself," she said solemnly. "Yes, fairy godmother," I said with a smirk. "I promise I'll be home before midnight." She only shook her head, but I thought a smile flashed across her face. The event was being held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and I splurged on a cab because I didn't want to sweat on the subway. As I entered the lobby, I didn't notice Alex at first, but then the crowd parted and he appeared, resplendent in his Superman costume. I assumed he would wear a regular suit and tie or even a tuxedo for such an important event, but I figured if he was brave enough to go in a suit, I might as well be brave enough to go with him. As soon as he spotted me, he immediately rushed over to us. "I've never seen you in a dress before. You look amazing," he said, and even though I knew he was just being nice, I was still pleased to hear him say it. We took the elevator up to the Empire Room, which was already packed with a crowd of people busy eating, drinking, and socializing. However, when Alex and I entered the lounge, there was an instant buzz, and no sooner had we found something to drink than we were surrounded by people asking questions and making small talk. It was interesting to see how these supposedly sophisticated people reacted to Alex in his Superman costume, and I was once again amazed at how easily he interacted with complete strangers. But it would have been nice if the two of us had had a chance to be alone together. I guess that's what happens when you're around a celebrity, and I had to remind myself that I was at least partly to blame for his fame. At that moment, 3 people about our age ran up to us and started chatting animatedly with Alex, teasing him and talking about what had happened at work. I held back so he could talk to his friends, but he put his arm around my waist and pulled me gently to him. "Hi, everyone," he said. "This is Ella Finn, my traveling companion. She is also the reporter who wrote the Times article." He turned to me. "These are the people I told you about in my office. This is Jacob, Tommy, and Marie," he told me as he introduced them one by one. When I shook hands with the 2 guys, I noticed that they both took the opportunity to check me out, and that pleased me. But when I shook Marie's hand, I thought I saw a hint of jealousy flicker in her eyes. I guess she was hoping Alex would ask her to go with him, I thought, and felt a slight smugness at the fact that I was the one who ended up in his arms. After a few more minutes of conversation, the 3 of them retreated to the appetizer table to refresh their plates, and I took the opportunity to pull Alex aside. "So what was that about something big happening in your office?" I asked. "Gosh, I almost forgot to tell you about the big news. Mrs. Grissom called me into her office today, and I was sure she was going to hand me the axe, but instead, she said she liked the manuscript I gave her. She thinks it has a lot of potential." "That's great, Alex," I said excitedly. "I can't believe it. Your gamble paid off." "And that's not all," he continued. "She told me she really admired my initiative and willingness to take risks. She said that was exactly the kind of senior editor they needed. So instead of getting fired, I got a promotion and a big raise." "Oh, Alex, congratulations," I exclaimed and hugged him. He responded to my hug, and it felt really good until I suddenly felt him tense up. "What is it?" asked I. "It's Glenda, my ex," he said in a low voice. "She's on her way over here, and that's Connor James with her. He's the guy she cheated with." "Why are they here?" I asked. "I should have known she'd be here, but I didn't even think about it," he said. "Her firm does a lot of legal work with the publishing business." I turned and saw a pretty blonde in an evening gown, accompanied by a man in a tuxedo. Her scowling face gave the impression that she had eaten something sour. She didn't wait for us to approach and spoke in an angry voice. "All right, Ed, I can't believe you showed up to an event like this in that stupid Halloween costume, Alex. You made a complete fool of yourself." Alex folded his arms across his chest, and I noticed the tension in his posture. "Why are you so upset, Glenda? Why do you care what I wear? You look ridiculous in that padded suit, and I'm embarrassed to see you here looking like that amongst all these important people." "I'm sorry to embarrass you, but I'm going to wear what I want whether you like it or not," Alex said, and then added, And for your information, the suit has no lining. Reflexively, Glenda reached out and touched his bicep, then jerked it away in embarrassment as she realized what she had done. Clearly trying to change the subject, she looked at me. You haven't introduced me to your little companion for the evening, she said wryly. I beg your pardon, he said wryly. Glenda Preston, let me introduce you to Ella Finn. This is the New York Times reporter who wrote the Sunday magazine article about me. She looked at me with a chuckle. How appropriate, she said. An associate editor at a publishing house and a reporter at a newspaper. Two losers from two dying industries. Then, before either of us could react, she grabbed her companion's arm and said loudly, Come on, Connor. Let's get out of here. Alex started to stalk after her, but I grabbed his arm. Please don't make a scene, Alex, I pleaded. Who cares what she thinks? For a second, I thought he was going to pull away from me and go after her, but then his muscles relaxed. Okay, Elle, I'll leave it at that. It's just that she has a way of getting to me. I've barely seen or talked to her since she left, and I thought she couldn't upset me anymore. And here, in less than 2 minutes, she's insulting me and you, and there's nothing I can do about it. I didn't want to ask, but I couldn't resist voicing my concerns. Do you still have feelings for her, Alex? I asked. He was stunned. Oh God, no, it's not about that at all. I guess what makes me so upset is that she's the one who messed everything up. She's the one who lied and left me, and I'm the one who feels bad. And then suddenly she shows up tonight and acts like it's all my fault. And there's nothing I can do about it. It was clear he was still hurt by what had happened, but I was relieved that he wasn't fixated on Glenda. I tried to divert his attention by talking about his work and my own. We stayed and chatted. I drank champagne. He drank sparkling water, and the two of us ate so many appetizers it would have been enough for an entire meal. We even went out on the floor and did a little dance, and we were both starting to feel better. Finally, Alex leaned over to me and said, I'm ready to go if you are. When I nodded, he walked me to the stairs, and we got into a waiting cab. I can afford it more often now, he said with a slight smile. As we drove to my apartment, I thought about what had happened tonight. I liked Alex a lot, and I admired him in many ways. At the same time, I realized that he was deeply hurt by what Glenda had done. He had told me this before, but tonight I had experienced firsthand that she still had the upper hand over him. What a bitch, I thought angrily, and wished I could do anything to help. I was beginning to feel very protective of this contradictory man who was both strong and weak. Perhaps because of this, or maybe just because a little of the courage from his Superman suit had transferred over to me as well, when we got to my house, I asked him if he wanted to go upstairs for a while. He looked at me triumphantly and replied, Yes, I really do. Unlocking the door to my darkened apartment, I whispered, My neighbor is probably asleep by now, so we'll have to be quiet. But as I reached for the light switch, his big hand covered mine to stop me. Then he lifted me up in his arms like I weighed nothing. Which one is your bedroom? He asked, and all I could do was point to it. Truth be told, that's what I'd expected when I'd invited him into the house. But I hadn't expected him to read my mind so well and take matters into his own hands. But now, I was glad he had. Waking up in the morning, I reached for him, but his bed was empty. I felt annoyed at the thought of him sneaking out. But no sooner had I started feeling sorry for myself than he reappeared in the doorway, and I realized that he must need to go to the bathroom. I was relieved and happy when he climbed back under the sheet next to me and fell asleep. We had a great night. After a while, I got up and took a quick shower before making coffee and starting breakfast. I heard the shower running again and figured he was awake too. Sure enough, he soon emerged, smiling gratefully at me when he smelled the food. I had just had time to set the table for him when my roommate's door opened and she appeared in her robe and slippers. Alex, I said, this is my neighbor, Terry Feldman. Terry, this is Alex Stevenson. They shook hands, and after pouring herself a cup of coffee, she sat down and continued to stare at Alex so intently that he couldn't help but notice. I guess you're not used to seeing someone in a Superman costume, he said good-naturedly. No, she replied. I'm not used to seeing my neighbor bring home a man. Alex chuckled, and I blushed with embarrassment. Sunday was a rainy Sunday, and since Terry had somewhere to go, I asked Alex if he could stay for a while. He agreed, and we spent the morning sitting on the couch reading the Sunday paper. I was starting to feel warm and homely. Alarm bells were ringing in my head, but I didn't pay attention to them because I was feeling so good. After a while, Alex put the paper aside and turned to me. So what's up with your roommate? She seems much older than you. Are you two related? No, I laughed. Although sometimes she acts like my mother. She sort of adopted me at work, and when my ex-boyfriend kicked me out of his apartment, she offered to let me move in with her. Terry's been taking care of me ever since. He nodded. After a couple more minutes, he spoke again. I just realized. You already know everything about me, he said. How about you let me hear your story? I poured myself another cup of coffee and began. There's not much to tell. As a kid, I was something of a tomboy. Besides not being attracted to feminine things, I started getting fat late, so boys in high school didn't pay much attention to me. But that didn't bother me much because I got into writing. Instead of socializing, I worked on the school newspaper and yearbook. By the time I got to college, I had a figure, and some male students started hitting on me. But I was pretty shy because of my lack of experience. And most of the guys weren't patient enough to wait until I located myself to them. Once again, I started spending most of my free time writing. In addition to my college work, I tried to write the great American novel. Unsuccessfully, it must be said. Although I didn't date much, I did have one pretty intense romance, but the guy broke my heart my senior year of high school when he dumped me for someone else. When I graduated from college, I managed to get a job at my hometown newspaper. While I was working there, I did reporting, which gave me a good reputation. When I applied for a job at the Times, they apparently liked what I was doing because I got the job. When my then boyfriend dumped me, Terry took me under her wing, and that's pretty much my whole story. Alex and I spent all day at my apartment and ended up making love again. It was no worse than the first time. Eventually, he said he had to go home to get ready for work on Monday. As he left, he kissed me and said, "I'll call you." I hoped he meant it, but that's exactly what my last beau said, and I never heard from him again. I really hoped Alex was sincere, especially since in many ways, this was the best weekend of my life. I wasn't ready for it to be over. Terry came home a little later and looked at me carefully. Well, I'll tell you what, he's definitely getting attention. When I didn't say anything, she gave me a hard look. You really have it bad, don't you? I've never seen you treat a guy like that. He's really special, I admitted, but I still have a lot of doubts. It's so weird. I'm happier than ever, but at the same time, I'm scared to death. She only shook her head. If he hurts you, I'll make a contract with him. I knew she was joking, but I really liked her concern. She walked down the hall, but then turned around. Oh, and next time, don't forget to use an air freshener. It stinks in here. I turned crimson. Monday night when I got home, no sooner had I closed the door than my phone rang. It was Alex, and he was so excited I could barely understand him. Elle, you won't believe what happened tonight. CBS called. I'm going to be on Letterman's show tomorrow night. He revealed that he has been a huge fan of David's for years and couldn't believe he would be a guest on his idol's show. Will your participation on the Letterman show be a problem for Mrs. Grissom? I asked, but Alex assured me that there would be no problem with the publisher. It's great publicity for them, he enthused. I promised him I'd watch, as if I could do anything else. But after I hung up the phone, I was overcome with mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was so happy about Alex's unexpected good fortune and so glad that he had decided to call me to share the news. On the other hand, a nagging voice asked if I liked the real Alex or just the man in the suit. Now that I thought about it, I realized that I'd never seen him without a suit except when we went to bed together. Then I suddenly began to wonder if the suit was a crutch he needed to get by in life. I tried to brush off my doubts, but they wouldn't go away so easily. It's so like me to fret over good news. Needless to say, on Tuesday night, Terry and I settled in front of the TV just in time for the Letterman show to start. David's first guest was a pretty young pop singer in a very short skirt who performed her latest hit and then took a seat on the couch to chat with the host for a bit. Then, after a commercial break, David introduced the man everyone in New York City is talking about, the city's latest hero, Superman. The audience applauded as Alex took the stage, waved to the crowd, and then shook hands with David and the pop star. I held my breath, hoping Alex wouldn't do anything that might seem funny, but I needn't have worried. Despite his adoration for Letterman, Alex seemed relaxed and at ease with the conversation. He told the story of why he started wearing the suit, and then continued the tale of his run-in with a biker in a bar. This story drew an approving response from the audience. Responding to a few leading questions from David, Alex deftly gave self-deprecating answers that drew laughter and applause. It was obvious that even Letterman was impressed. The pop star, for his part, couldn't resist stroking Alex's biceps and making suggestive comments about being a man of steel. "Show us your superpower," she persisted, even when Alex refused. But after she asked a third time, he winked at Letterman, then stood up, bent over and grabbed the squealing girl under her arms, spinning her easily in a large circle and showing her that she was wearing a thong. When he deftly sat her back down on the couch, she exclaimed, "Oh my God, that was amazing!" And the audience erupted in laughter and applause. Letterman, who never missed a cue, shouted out, "Ladies and gentlemen, Superman!" And the applause turned into an ovation. Alex turned and bowed to the singer, shook Letterman's hand again, and left the stage, waving to the audience, who continued to applaud. Terry turned to me in amazement. "That's quite a performance. Are you sure it's never been on TV before?" "I don't think so," I replied. But at the same time, I was shocked at how successful Alex's performance had been. I was beginning to be convinced that the costume really was magical. The next day at work, I checked the blogs of the night's critics and saw that Alex's performance had generated a ton of approving comments. I tried calling him to congratulate him, but the line was busy every time, so I left him a voicemail. He didn't call back until the afternoon. "I'm sorry I didn't call you back sooner, Elle," he said, "but my phone has been ringing off the hook all day. And listen, I got a call from the William Morris Agency. They want to represent me. They think I have show business potential." "Really? That's incredible, Alex," I said. "And what did you tell them?" "Well, I told them I wanted to think about it. It means I'd have to quit my job here. But the guy said he thought they could get me a lot of shows and gigs and it would bring in a lot of money. He even hinted that they might make a deal with Hollywood to make a movie." The whining voice I'd heard earlier was now screaming at me, but I tried not to give away my fear. "Oh, Alex, I'm so happy for you. Everything seems to be working out just fine." "I know," he said, "but I don't want to rush into this and make a decision I'll regret later." He grinned crookedly. "I already did that once with Glenda." I offered to help him in any way I could, but then he got a phone call and had to disconnect. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," he promised. When I returned home that evening, I felt strangely depressed. I had rejoiced at Alex's success, but all I could see was how he would be wearing the Superman suit for years to come. What kind of future could he and I have if he went on a talk show or, worse, to Hollywood? I felt like he cared about me, but I could see that I was becoming nothing more than a footnote in his story. Yet, the hopeful side of me begged me not to get ahead of myself, but the pessimist in me said trouble was already here and looming on my doorstep. Writing is one way to relax, but that night I couldn't find the energy to even do that. "Ryan!" Terry poked her head in the door and demanded to know what was bothering me, and I tearfully told her my fears. "As far as I'm concerned," Terry said, "the real problem is this Glenda. She's his kryptonite. He can't stop wearing the suit because she's still capable of harming him. Do you want me to make a contract with her?" I laughed and escorted her out of the room. 2 days later, I was working on a routine task in my office when a coworker walked up to me and intercepted my gaze. "Hey, Elle, aren't you the one dating Superman?" When I blushed and admitted that we were dating, he pointed to my computer and said, "Look in Gawker today. There's an article that mentions him." When I first looked at the news and gossip blog, I didn't see the article because I was looking for Alex's picture. But when I looked again, I found it. Under the headline, "Woman Who Broke Superman's Heart," was a picture of a woman angrily pacing the street trying to fight off the camera. I suddenly realized it was Glenda Preston, Alex's ex-wife. According to the reporter, who clearly sympathized with Alex, everyone in New York is asking who hurt Superman so badly. She then revealed, in an exclusive Gawker piece, the whole story of how Glenda cheated on Alex with attorney Connor James for months before finally dumping Alex. There were enough juicy details to realize that someone in the know had snitched on Glenda. I immediately tried to call Alex, but again I couldn't get through. He didn't call me that night either, which made me even more suspicious, so I decided not to bother him. Maybe it was just me, but I could feel the distance between us growing, and the boldness I was starting to feel when I was around him seemed to be dissipating. One of the things we do regularly at the paper is check out what our competitors are publishing. Of course, we at the Times don't recognize that we have competitors, but we still check other news outlets just in case. To make matters worse, on this day I was checking the Daily News, which the Times staff doesn't even recognize as a legitimate newspaper. However, as I was looking through the New York section, an article headlined "Former Superman Got the Axe" caught my eye. Of course, the article breathlessly recounted how Glenda Preston had been relieved of her duties at the law firm of Dennison and Louser, and that Connor James, whom the article dubbed her paramour, had also left without notice. A senior partner at Dennison and Louser said that their behavior during office hours disgraced the firm's good name, as if the law firm had a good name, but I remembered how she'd behaved with me at the cocktail party and was glad there was some justice in the world after all. And this time, when I called Alex, I was surprised to get through to him. When I started to tell him about the Daily News article, he interrupted me. "Oh yes," he said. "I heard every word because Glenda called me herself and told me about it. She went toe-to-toe with me, accusing me of planting the story. Even when I pointed out details I couldn't possibly know, she still refused to believe I wasn't behind it." "So what do you think about it?" I asked. "I think I'm still digesting it all," he said. "It all happened so fast and I don't know what to make of it." He paused, as if trying to make a decision. Finally, he continued. "Elle, this week has been the craziest week of my life and I need to talk to you about something. Would you mind meeting me Saturday afternoon at the Central Park Zoo?" When I said yes, we agreed on a time, and then he called. As I hung up the phone, I felt encouraged that he wanted to talk to me about his life. But after a while, my doubts began to grow, and by evening, I needed to discuss them with Terry. She understood my concerns about Alex and even offered additional reasons why I should be extra cautious. "I just don't want you to get hurt," she said. "I want to know," I told her. "Why does he want to meet me at the zoo? What's the big deal?" She was on top of him in a flash. "It's because of the kids," she said. "It's always full of kids there, and I bet he wants to play out his Superman act with them. Maybe he even wants to get it on camera." My heart clenched. It all made sense now. This was going to be the start of his new career in show business. I hoped things would work out the way he wanted, but I knew that wasn't the case for me at all. I wanted to be his girlfriend, not a prop in Alex and Superman's show. I hate to admit it, but I shed a few tears that night after I went to bed. I almost didn't go the next day, but Terry insisted. "Look, at least he had the decency to tell you to your face. Do him the courtesy of listening to his story, even if it may not be the one you want to hear. Who knows, it might be something completely different." I knew she was right, so I did my best to calm my fears and headed to the park. I took the F train at 57th and 6th Street, then walked around the pond and down East Drive until I was at the entrance to the zoo. There was a cluster of laughing and playing children near the ticket booth, and I fully expected to see Alex entertaining them. But his red and blue suit was nowhere to be seen. After buying my ticket, I walked up to the main entrance but still couldn't spot him and found a shady spot to wait. As I sat and pondered what had happened, I noticed a man in jeans and a t-shirt walking in my direction. When he stopped right in front of me, I was startled. "Alex," I squeaked in surprise. "Is that you?" I didn't even recognize him. I'd already thought out the whole conversation, but now that he appeared in civilian clothes, I couldn't think of what to say. As we walked towards the center of the zoo, I muttered, "I don't think I've ever seen you not in a Superman costume." "Are you disappointed?" he asked, and there was a note of concern in his voice that surprised me. "No, it's not that," I said. "It's just that I was expecting to see you playing with the kids and your alter ego." "Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about," he said as we approached the sea lion pool. We stopped at the railing to watch the playful creatures swim and bark for a minute, and then he led me over to a bench. He was silent for so long that I couldn't stand it. "So what's going on, Alex?" I asked, trying not to sound too alarmed. "Why aren't you wearing a suit?" He turned to look at me, and I thought I saw apprehension flicker in his eyes again. "You know, I started wearing the suit because of Glenda. I was devastated by her leaving and humiliated that she made me a cuckold. I know it's crazy, but the thing is, the suit seemed to help. I didn't feel so vulnerable when I put it on, and it helped me get my confidence back. I started exercising and quit drinking, and that did me good too. Then fame came, and things started happening really fast. I got promoted at work when I took the manuscript to my boss, then I got on the Letterman show, and now I have people who want me to go to Hollywood. He reached out and took my shoulder. But the best thing that happened to me out of all of this was meeting you, he said quietly. My breath caught and my hopes started to rise, but he shattered them with his next words. But now I have a problem and I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. I don't understand, Alex. The thing is, I started wearing this costume to protect myself from humiliation. But now that everyone knows the real story, she's the one who was humiliated. She can no longer hurt me, and now she has to suffer the consequences of her actions. As a result, I no longer feel the need to wear the suit. I was encouraged by his words, but I couldn't ignore the implications. But Alex, if you stop wearing the suit, it means you'll miss out on the opportunities the agent talked about. You could be giving up real fame and fortune. Maybe, he said, but that's not who I am, not who I want to be. And that scares me. He looked intently into my eyes. Would you be disappointed if I gave it all up? Would you still be interested in me if I wasn't Superman anymore? Oh, Alex! I screamed and threw myself into his arms, kissing him wildly and crying at the same time. When I finally calmed down, he held me at arm's length and bestowed his gorgeous smile. I guess that means you're okay with it. Behind us, the seals started barking and clapping, and we both had to laugh. As we walked toward the subway, I tried to tell him how happy I was with his decision and how impressed I was with all the changes that had happened to him since Glenda had left him. Wearing the suit was a little weird, I admitted. But it was what you needed to get to the level you're at now, and I'm okay with that. When we got to my apartment, Terry was already waiting for us with her hands on her hips and a stern expression on her face. But when she saw the two of us together, she relaxed and smiled. Looks like that went well, she said, and came over to me for a hug. Then she turned to Alex. You better treat her right, Superman, or I'll be looking for you. But she said it with a satisfied smile, and Alex leaned over and hugged her and promised her that she would. Okay, Terry said. I have to go meet some friends, and you two look like you could use some privacy. Reaching the door, she turned around to look at me. Don't forget, she said. The air freshener is in the closet. With those words, she walked out, leaving me blushing. Alex came over and put his arm around my shoulders. She really cares about you, doesn't she? He said. Like I said, she's more like my guardian angel than my roommate, I told him. She can be a little annoying sometimes, but it's nice to know she's got my back. As the two young men left for Elle's bedroom, Terry walked down the sun-drenched sidewalk until she came to a small roadside cafe. Noticing her two friends waiting at a table, she waved and asked the waiter to bring her a drink. Well, one of the women said, don't keep us in suspense. Did everything work out as you hoped? Yes. Terry exulted, waving her fist triumphantly. I finally got Alex out of his Superman costume and it's just the two of them. They're already back at the apartment and from the way they looked at each other, they're going to be together for a long time. The second woman shook her head admiringly. I have to hand it to you, Terry. You have a flair. Terry lowered her eyes with apparent false modesty. It's all right, she said. Of course, for a while I wasn't sure about the boy. When I first saw him in that suit, I thought he was crazy, a mishugener. But Ella was clearly fascinated by him, and as I learned more about him, I realized that he was a good man who was badly hurt by the bitch he married. And even though they divorced, it became clear to me that she was still a bad influence on him. I decided that if I wanted to bring Ellie and him together, I had to do something to break that curse. The other friend leaned forward. And how did you do that? Well, Terry continued, I had a little help. My sister works at the same law firm as that bitch, and she gave me information on what was going on over there. All I had to do was call a blogger I know at Gawker and tell her the best part. When the story broke, that was all it took to expose the ex-wife and give her what she deserved. Once that happened, Alex was freed from her curse, just as I had envisioned. Perfect, her friend exclaimed. You think that's a good thing? Terry smugly continued. Wait till you hear what else I've done for Elle. Well, the other woman said. Come on. What did you do? Said. Terry reached into her voluminous purse and pulled out a stack of papers. What's this? The first woman asked. It's a book contract for Elle, Terry announced triumphantly. She never believed she was good enough, but I knew better. So I took a copy of her manuscript, pretended to be her agent, and sent it to a publishing house. Sure enough, they offered her a contract. She winked at the other ladies. Maybe this will be my wedding present to her. The second woman shook her head admiringly and raised her glass. I nominate Terry Feldman for Yente of the Year. All three women laughed and drained their glasses. Terry looked at her friends and smiled. I don't know about that, but I know one thing, she said. If you want to accomplish anything, you don't need a costume or superpowers. All you need is a little chutzpah. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.